Good morning. My name is Dwayne Spearman. Welcome to Directional Bible Ministries. This is a teaching ministry that is called to encourage, strengthen, and challenge the people of God. We have been working our way through the book of Daniel together. In the previous three sessions, we have looked at verses 1 through 8. So Daniel chapter number 1, verses 1 through 8. In the third year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, came Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, unto Jerusalem, and he besieged it. And the Lord gave Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand, with part of the vessels of the house of God, which he carried into the land of Shinar, to the house of his God. And he brought the vessels into the treasure house of his God. And the king spake unto Ashpenaz, the master of the eunuchs, that he should bring certain of the children of Israel and of the king's seed of the princes, children in whom was no blemish, but well favored, skillful in all wisdom, cunning in knowledge, and understanding science, and such as had ability in them to stand in the king's palace, and whom might teach the learning, each the learning and the tongue of the Chaldeans. Of course, Chaldeans are Babylonians, which is modern day Iraq, and we talked about that. Those countries are all still there. Rome's still there. Persia is still there. That's Iran. Babylon is still there. That's Iraq. And you got the Assyrians. Of course, you've got the Egyptians and, the Israelites. I mean, all them countries are still there. They just all had different zeniths or peaks in their histories. And in verse 5, and the king appointed them a daily provision of the king's meat and of the wine which he drank, so nourishing them 3 years, that at the end thereof they might stand before the king. Now among these were the children of Judah, Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. I was at a conference just last week, and a father introduced his son to me. And I couldn't remember his son's name, but I knew it was one of Daniel's friends, but it was his Hebrew name. So his name was Azariah. Unto whom the prince of the eunuchs gave names, he gave Daniel the name Belteshazzar, and to Hananiah Shadrach, and to Mishael Meshach, and to Azariah Abednego. But Daniel purposed in his heart that he would not defile himself with the portion of the king's meat, nor with the wine which he drank. Therefore he requested of the prince of the eunuchs that he might not defile himself. So we were talking about last time how that, Daniel decided he was going to take a stand, and he was not going to eat food that had been sacrificed to idols. And we were talking about in our previous study how that, there's a constant pressure on us in this life to conform. The world doesn't like transformers, okay? The world likes conformers. They want you to look like, talk like, walk like them. You see that pressure. I'm humored. I've taught in private school, and almost every one of them, except for one, required that the students be in uniform. I personally like uniforms because it takes that little competition away. It makes them all equal. Plus there's conformity in the way that they're dressed. But and then a lot of the parents will argue that, well, my kids want to be an individual, but go on any college campus, any high school campus, they're all dressing the same, whether they're in uniform or not. They're wearing the most popular clothes. They're wearing the most popular, shoes. I mean, I personally think uniforms are a lot better way to go in the school setting. But anyway, even today, we're under a constant pressure to look like, walk like, talk like everybody else. And if you're different, you're going to be marked. And the same is as believers in Christ. Believers in Christ, there's a lot of pressure on us to be worldly. But we are called to resist that temptation. Paul said, I beseech you, therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, that you present your bodies a living sacrifice, not a dead one, a living sacrifice, holy, acceptable unto God, which is your reasonable. I mean, it's the most logical thing you can do in lieu of everything that God has done for you, and be not conformed to this world. Okay, in other words, do not take the shape of this world, but be ye transformed by the renewing of your mind, that you may prove what is good and acceptable and perfect will of God. So, Paul makes it very clear that if you want to find the will of God, you have to be transformed. You're not going to find the will of God by being conformed, shaped by the world. The bottom line is that the world wants us, again, to look like them, talk like them. And if you don't, they're going to look at you weird. The world does not like different. And again, if you don't believe that, go in the average elementary classroom and check out the kid that's different. Of course, I was a redhead. My hair was very red when I was young, and I was always the different one in the room. The world repels different. You might ask, well, what's wrong with the world? Well, John answered that question in John 15:19. If you were of the world would love its own. Yet because you are not of the world, but I chose you, and of course this is Jesus speaking, out of the world, therefore the world hates you. You're different. You've been set apart. You've been made holy. You've been consecrated. You belong to Him now. You don't belong to the world. We are to have no affinity with the world at all. As believers, we're to be different. We're called out. Paul told the Corinthians that the God of this world has blinded the lost to the gospel. We're not to be. We have not been blinded. Our eyes have been open. We are not them anymore. So again, love not the world, neither things in the world. So all of us can learn by the example that was set by Daniel and his friends. Now look at verse number 9. Now God brought Daniel into favor and tender love with the prince of the eunuchs. And the prince of the eunuchs said unto Daniel, I fear my lord the king, who hath appointed your meat and drink. For why should he see your faces worse liking than the children which are of your sort? In other words, captives like you. Then shall ye make me endanger my head before the king. So the eunuch here is like, listen, this has worked all along, and if I let you guys go on this vegetarian diet, eating nothing but vegetables, and you appear before the king and you look weakly compared to the others of your sort, you could cost me my head for failing to do my job before the king. Of course, Daniel proceeded, and he wanted to do that. And God blessed Daniel's commitment to live for Him. It's been said God's way may not be popular, and the path of holiness may not be well traveled, but it's always the right way. It's always best to do the harder right. And in a world that is going to the left, literally, politically, it's very hard to do the right. And we see that in our political culture today. The United States is so divided right now between left and right. Left tends to be the ones that are progressive, liberal, which liberal is actually a good word. The liberal arts that came out of the Renaissance, it literally means to be open, to be free thinkers. But now, today, it's become negative, representative of the left. I mean, they're so open-minded, their brains are falling out. We're not to be that way either. No earthly guarantees. I feel the need to point out this point that just because we're faithful does not guarantee that all things will work out in our favor, at least not on this earth. And that's true. A lot of times we think, well, if I just do the right things, it's all going to work out in my favor. Well, I mean, it will always work out in our favor in the next life, but there's no guarantees that it's going to work out in our favor in this life. Countless faithful saints have met their end at the point of a spear or on a pyre, being burned to death. So just because you're faithful, the favor and the blessing that results in following the ways of the Lord can be earthly. In other words, we can receive blessing in this life for doing the right thing, but also, and I think most of the time, it is not earthly or terrestrial, but it is heavenly or celestial. In other words, we receive the blessing in the next life in the presence of our Lord. And that's really what we're supposed to be working for. We're not to be man pleasers. We're to be God pleasers. We do it because God told us to do it. We make the hard right decision because God told us to. That's how we should be living our lives. Now notice the pulse in the water in verses 11, 12. Then said Daniel to Melzar, whom the prince of the eunuchs has set over Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, prove thy servants. Remember, he was afraid because he said, listen, if I let you guys eat this vegetarian diet, you're going to look like a bunch of vegans when it comes to stand before the king, and you could actually cost me my head. And Daniel says, why don't you prove your servants? I'm begging you. Give us just 10 days and let them give us, in other words, the people who gave them their food, pulse to eat and water to drink. So prove us. Give us 10 days. Let us eat nothing but the veggies, no meat that's been sacrificed to your gods, and see what we look like. So, again, pulse just means veggies in the King James. And what they want is they want good, nourishing food, but they want to stay away from the meat that would violate their conscience, since the meat that they were being offered had already been sacrificed to false gods. Now, in the New Testament, Paul addressed this in a letter to the Corinthians, where he wrote in 1 Corinthians 8 that an idol is nothing. Now, Paul is speaking to the body of Christ, the grace believers. And he tells them, he says, who cares? Eat it. An idol is nothing. You can eat it with a clear conscience. The only caveat that Paul put on our ability as grace believers to eat food that was sacrificed to an idol is if you're with a brother that is offended by it, then it's better that you not eat it so as not to offend your brother. And I think that's true of all things. We need to be careful. I mean, Paul said, I can do a lot of things, but I shouldn't knowingly cause my brother to stumble by my freedom. Exercise your freedom alone, but not at the expense of other believers. Interestingly, I mean, Paul calls that person a weaker brother or a weaker believer, which, when I read the Bible, every time I see the word weaker, I think it's the other guy. But many times I can be the weaker brother as well. I may not realize it, but Paul refers to them as the weaker brother. And if your weaker brother is offended by your freedom, it's better that you not offend your weaker brother. And then notice what he says in verses 13 and 15. Then let our countenances be looked upon before thee, and the countenance of the children that eat of the portion of the king's meat. So compare us after 10 days. Look at us, eating only veggies. Look at them, eating the meat, and see. And as thou seest, deal with thy servants. So if we don't look just as good as they do, you can deal with it then. So he consented to them in this matter and proved them for 10 days. And at the end of the 10 days, their countenance appeared fairer and fatter in flesh than all the children which did eat the portion of the king's meat. So the Lord proves faithful to Daniel's. Again, it's always far better to please God than to please the world. Many have found that God will always prove himself faithful if we do things his way. Now, again, that doesn't necessarily mean, like I said, there's a lot of people who have died who have been faithful to God. And God remains faithful even though we are faithless. But God's ways are not our ways. Many a saint has went to their death by being faithful to God. And God, in return, was faithful to them in that he brought them home to him. I mean, all of us have an expiration date, and only God knows when that date is. Only God knows what decision will lead to that in our lives. But pray that it is a faithful decision, a decision that is based on trust in God for the outcome. We'll get down to later on in Daniel where Daniel appears to be away because only Mishael, Azariah, and Hananiah, is that right, are there, and the king says, you need to bow down to this idol. And the three look at him and say, listen, O king, we're not going to bow. We trust God to deliver us, and if he doesn't, we're still not going to bow. They realized that could be their last decision, but they were going to trust God in that decision. So there is no better example of this than Noah as well. Noah trusted God. He built the ark for him and his family. I heard Adrian Rogers say one time that it's better to be right and in the minority than to be wrong and in the majority. So the three Hebrew boys were in the minority because everybody else was bowing. Noah was in the minority because everybody else was not faithful to God. They were not going to be on the ark. But one day we're going to be in the majority because there's going to come a time when we're going to be taken out, and we're going to be in the majority at that point. I think of the millennium. I'm a dispensationalist, as you know. I was reading this yesterday because it's part of my teaching and another thing. But for a brief moment after when the millennium starts, every single person on earth will be a believer. Majority. Now, dispensationally, what that means is when the rapture of the church happens, taken out, for a moment, every single person on earth will be an unbeliever because that's the tribulation period. For a moment, everyone will be an unbeliever. Of course, there will be people who come to believe. And then at the second coming, every person on earth that enters into the millennial reign of Christ will be a believer. And of course, there will be unbelievers that will come about as well. But anyway, what Adrian Rogers said is true. It's better to be in the right and in the minority than to be wrong and in the majority. He also said when speaking of Noah, he went into the ark in the minority, but he came out in the majority. Same thing with you and me. We would do well to remember that. That means standing for the right will result in us standing alone sometimes, making a hard decision that is not a popular decision. And we are, I mean, people have a herd mentality. Nobody likes to be alone. I mean, we like to be around people, and preferably we want to be around people like us. And for young people, even adults, when there's nobody like us, we tend to compromise so that we can fit in. You know, I talk to young people about, I like you because you're like me. And that's true. I like people who are like me. I mean, that's just natural. I'm repelled by people who are not like me. My friends are like me. That's why I like them and they like me. I'm not drawn to people who aren't like me. You know, I mean, look at our little experiment that we're having right now. I mean, the West has survived thousands of years, and look what diversity is doing. Okay, it's destroying the West. Churches, Christian churches, are being burned down almost on a weekly basis. Who's burning them down? They're either just accidents, which is quite coincidental, or our diverse population that we have allowed in is burning down all of these Christian churches. Yeah, I mean, if you study historically, diversity does not work. It never has worked. Ask the Romans how diversity worked out. Okay, it ended up being their downfall. It's going to end up being the downfall of the West. If you've never done a study on the sons of Noah, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, knock yourself out. Read Henry Morris. And of course, you teach this today, you're immediately called a racist, but you look at Shem and his descendants. Who are they? You look at Japheth and his descendants. Who are they today? You look at Ham and his descendants, and who are they today? Well, they all went to different geographical regions. Okay, went to the east. You got the what are they called? You got the Orientals. You got the Caucasians, or what you would call what is it? The Kazoids, the Mongoloids, and the Negroids, I think is what it is. But study all of that. I mean, the Bible is true, whether you like it or not, whether it offends your sensibilities or not. You look at the curses and the blessings that were placed on those three boys, we're living it out today. The Sethites were the spiritual leaders, the Japhites were the industrialists, and the Hamites were cursed because of what they did. They would be servants to their brothers. I mean, study it out. I know it'll offend your sensibilities, but read it. Henry Morris, his book on the Genesis record is very good. Let God be true and every man a liar, whether you like it or not. That's the way it is. Let's see, I'm at 23 minutes. So not an easy lesson is what we were talking about. If we do things God's way, He'll bless. And again, it may not be in this life, but it'll be in the next. And it's not an easy lesson to learn because we want to fit in. We want to be liked. We want to be well received. And look at a young person. I tell parents all the time, be careful. It just shocks me how parents will just throw their kids to the wolves when it's time to send them to college. I mean, they will protect them from kindergarten through 12th grade, making sure watching their friends, making sure they're around believers, making sure they're they're protected. And then they'll send them off to some godless university. And then they're shocked when they come home and they're no longer like they were when they left. Again, Vodi Bakum, he famously said, if you give your children to Caesar, the state, Do not be shocked if they come back home as Romans. Okay? Don't be shocked. You got what you gave. Okay? And again, it's so much easier sometimes to make an easier wrong than to make a hard right. The world wants us, again, to be like them. The world wants God as far out of sight and mind as possible. They've kicked him out of everything. They don't want him in the schools. They don't want him in the government. Separation of church and state, which if you studied a little bit of history, those documents were not written to protect the government from me. Those documents were written to protect me from the government, period. And any other translation or interpretation of that is erroneous. All right, so all of this, the world, I think I'm trying to say here, the world must believe, or the world doesn't want to be constantly reminded of him. He will go away and leave them alone. They are wrong. In other words, the world thinks if we push God out of everything, he'll leave them alone. They're wrong. Just like Adam and Eve in the garden, whose consciences told them that they had sinned, and that's why they hid themselves, and that's why God came down in the cool of the day and said, Adam, where are you? Why did he say Adam? Because Adam was the one who was going to be held accountable for what happened. Paul used that as an argument in the New Testament that we're dealing with right now regarding female pastors. Adam was held accountable because Adam knew what Eve did. Eve had been deceived. So anybody that takes New Testament verses out of context and tries to justify female pastorship in the church is in error, because the argument doesn't start in the New Testament. The argument starts in Genesis. And that's the argument that Paul made. He went way back to establish authority. Man is the authority over the home, and then the woman, then the children. Paul made the same argument for leadership in the church. And of course, that's why they hate Paul. They don't want anything to do with Paul. The liberal church today has set aside Paul. He's a chauvinist. He's the bigot. I mean, listen to him talk. I've placed some videos on my Facebook, Directional Bible Ministries, that you can check out. But anyway, Adam and Eve's conscience is what caught them. And we all have a conscience. The word conscience means con, with, science, knowledge, with knowledge. We all have a knowledge of right and wrong. We all know when we've messed up. So anyway, I'll pick up on that. Apparently I'm talking about that quite a bit there. So next time we'll get down into the next set of verses, which will be 16, when he took away the meat, and how God rewarded Daniel and his friends for doing the right things. So anyways, God bless you guys. This is session 4. Today is July the 1st, and I hope you and your family are doing well, and hope you're enjoying the study here, and I appreciate each of you, and I'll see you later.